So, what's happening in your world of as it relates to podcasting?
As it relates to podcasting, I'm looking for some new podcasts. Actually, I find
Oh,
myself. It takes me a while to realize this, but the current set of podcasts that I'm listening to, um, I think I've heard enough. You know what I
mm,
mean? Like
yeah,
I'm listening to a lot of personality driven stuff, and it's like doesn't mean I don't love you anymore, but I need some new voices.
yeah.
Um, you've like I can read. This is historically, I don't know if it's a problem, but I can read the same book a lot of times. I can watch the same movie a lot of times, and it's not necessarily the healthiest thing over time, but it's like it becomes a comfort food. And like, okay, John Hodgman, I love you, but it's starting to all sound the same.
Yeah. John Hodgman. I actually haven't. What's is he like? Does he have a podcast that he's doing like the
Oh
smartest
yeah,
person?
his long-standing podcast is called Judge John Hodgman.
Right. Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, which is very popular, rightly so. He takes, it's kind of like the old People's Court, where people come in with very minor complaints, and like, but he's very, no matter how big the complaint is, how minor the complaint is, like he's always very thoughtful and tries to really figure out what the problem is, and like, it's usually an interpersonal thing, and he gets people to think about their habits and how they affect other people and like that
Hmm.
kind of stuff. So it's both funny and heartwarming all at the same time,
Yeah.
which is a great combination. Especially when you're talking about things like whether a hot dog is a sandwich.
Right.
Seems silly on the surface, and that is obviously one of the more silly things he's adjudicated, but he goes deep on it, and it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the. I kind of went. I remember Maximum Fun, like Jesse Thorne, right? Is the name of the
Hmm.
guy? Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
he just recently, he's the guy who started it, but he, I think last year, sold the company to his employees.
oh wow, that's cool. I think.
Yeah,
I assume.
yeah. Like it's one of those things where he could have sold it to
Yeah.
Spotify for a ton of money, but he is that kind of guy. So he the offered the employees the opportunity to buy him out, and I don't know what the figure was, but it was obviously enough for him, and obviously, it's clearly not nearly as much as he would have gotten from a
Yeah.
larger media company, but that's not what he's all about.
Yeah. We'll just ask. Who was it? They got bought by Spotify podcast network. Not Relayed Out of Fan. That's Tech Podcasts. Oh, why am I blanking on?
Earwolf.
Not Earwolf. The one that had it was like the podcast about podcasting was one of the main things where he started it from Gimlet. Gimlet. Gimlet.
Oh,
Does that sound right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one.
I used to listen to a Gimlet podcast. Now I can't remember which one it was.
Like they, I guess they're still going. And nothing against any of the shows on there. It was mainly like
Yeah.
Spotify bought them, and it was amazing for a year or two. And I'm sure the founders made buckets of money,
Oh, right,
obviously.
right, right. Gimlet. I'm not going to come out with any of the shows, but I'm remembering now that
Yeah,
they.
Startup was
Uh,
the sort of original one,
yes, exactly. Right.
and then from there, that was what started. It was the podcast about starting Gimlet, the podcast network, obviously back when it was very
Yeah.
cool to start a
Interesting.
podcast.
I hadn't heard that they'd been acquired. Because I listened to a couple, this was a few years ago. I listened to a couple of their podcasts, and then it all kind of started sounding the same to me. So I was leaning away from unsubscribing to a bunch of their stuff anyway. But then
Hmm.
they went through kind of a typical, COVID era reckoning of, as bosses, you guys are terrible. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So they kind of had to rejigger a bunch of stuff. And I wonder if they just figured that selling out was an easy way to get out from under that baggage, that like emotional baggage.
yeah, and I think it was a bit of like it's the classic. I mean, you see this all the time in tech circles where a startup will sell to somebody and they're like, "We're not going to change anything. It's all going to stay the
Sure.
same," and blah 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 blah.
Right.
And sorry, I'm trying to post that I'm live and talk at the same time,
Right.
which is not. It's a fool's errand.
But
But
that's always
then,
impossible to be true.
yeah, it's the fact that they just it won't. It's never, especially to
Yeah.
a megacorp that has their own reasons for buying that have nothing to do with almost like the only reason they're buying
Right.
you is because you're successful enough to make them money, more money than they pay for you. And if
Right.
suddenly you stop making them more money than they paid for you, their interests are obviously not aligned with just the fun of
Exactly. Making the content.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, I like Heavyweight is a really good one too. Jonathan Stein. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. I feel yes, I've heard
And
individual
then
episodes, but never actually subscribed to that.
yeah.
But
Oh, Reply All was like that's where one of the
that was
hosts
like
had
the
a bit of a
classic,
yeah.
right?
I
Yeah.
forget. Not it wasn't Emmanuel. It was someone else. Like obviously the guy who's not
Yeah.
listed as a co-host anymore. But I think they like so. Anyways, they had a bit of a reckoning in terms of both some problematic behavior, but also then a bunch of the hosts that kind of shut down shows that weren't profitable and went through layoffs, and the original
Mm-hmm.
sort of dream of what Gimlet was kind of went away.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Bridging this very quickly, but then some of those people now are removed from contracts and are able to like
Work on their own
work on
stuff.
their own stuff. Yeah. So search
Yeah.
engine, that's not the right thing. That's Google, Chrome, search engine podcast is one that's a really good sort of like that spirit of a show that's very internet meta
Mm-hmm.
nerds talking about stuff, but interviewing people like more story driven than anything I would do or whatever. And apparently my network's not happy.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't heard of that one. I haven't been listening to a lot of
This episode of
text.
Search Engine is brought to you in part by
That's a very familiar voice. Yes.
Yeah. At any rate, sorry, you haven't. You were saying before I played you
Yeah,
off.
like I've been listening to mostly, personality and entertainment stuff, and so I haven't listened to any tech stuff for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't. I dip in and out too with my play podcasts I subscribe to in terms of I subscribe to shows, but then it's very like episode driven as far as whether that particular one I would listen to. There's
Yeah.
everything from news stuff where I'd only when I
Yeah.
want to catch up on something versus with listening every day. So,
Yep.
but
Yeah. So my podcast feed at the moment is mainly Judge John Hodgman and McElroy stuff, but I'm definitely cutting back on the McElroy stuff as well.
That's that's like the brothers, right? Not Macklemore.
Yeah, the McElroy brothers. Yeah, I'm definitely no longer listening to their main podcast every week because it's entertaining and they seem to be great guys, but it's all just kind of samey stuff, and I'm finally drying up. And then they have a real play gaming podcast where they're not doing Dungeons and Dragons. They're doing something that they came up with for themselves, and it's not my favorite season, so I'm not listening to the Adventure Zone at the moment. What am I listening to? Oh, I'm listening to the West Wing Weekly is back, and they're doing recaps of political movies, and I really enjoy Rishikesh and this is terrible. I'm forgetting his name. Josh Molina's vibe together. They're really great.
West
I
Wing
love
Weekly?
listening to them talk about stuff. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. They originally, like 4 or 5 years ago, they wrapped up their recap of The West Wing, and they just recently came back, and it was kind of sad because they came back in like June or July, I want to say, and they were all excited because because politics was interesting again, and everybody was excited about Kamala Harris. And I haven't caught up
Spoiler.
to real time yet, so I have yet to hear their disappointment. It's funny because actually I work Josh Molina's sister is a client of mine, like a longtime maintenance. She's like a product or a project manager for one of my long-term maintenance projects, and I had to go tell her how sad I was that I had to keep listening to this great new podcast and listen to them be sad.
Yeah, just like the downwards.
Yeah. Oh no.
Yeah. That's actually the one show, one of the, those like marquee shows that people say to watch. Obviously, The West Wing, Sopranos, Breaking Bad. I don't know. Like, there's a bunch, obviously, that are kind of like universally in people's top 10 TV series to watch. And West Wing is one I missed getting into it initially, and now it feels daunting. And I know it's good. Like, you don't have to convince me that it would be worth diving into.
Yeah, it's gone through so many like like when it was on, it was just great TV and kind of like aspirational. And that was like it started in the Clinton era, and then
Right.
we quickly entered the Bush era, and it became and then it became even more aspirational of like, let compare these people are working hard to try and do good. And you compare that to the Bush administration, where they were working hard to kind of working on their own agenda and not necessarily working for the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
It appeared, to a lot of people. And then we enter the Obama era, and the West Wing kind of seems, quaint, because Obama was trying to do good, but he was also like shackled by, a Republican House and a Republican Congress. And so it's like the West Wing on the show, they could get things done despite, conflicts, but that's not how the real world works. And now, of course, in the Trump era, it's like, that's all fantasy. The West Wing is idealistic, progressive fantasy.
What's the Martin Luther King quote that everybody butchers, which is, I think itself a quote from like the arc of history bends towards justice or whatever, that phrase.
Oh, I can't recall it.
Yeah. Anyways, something like, I remember it's definitely felt like we're like just the fantasy idea of like, I remember hearing that and people repeating that. It's probably a misquoted thing. Even I don't know if it's actually attributed to Martin Luther King properly. But yeah, and thinking, yeah, I agree with that. And then the last 10 years, I've kind of been like, is it though?
Right.
Because I don't know that.
It seemed like it was bending towards justice.
I think somebody bent it sideways for a while, but
yeah, that seems like the anti-justice sides of the world grabbed the arc and started bending it back.
So bringing it back to the West Wing and then podcasting, if we sort of pull back out of that tangent, you would give it a thumbs up in terms of like worth a rewatch regardless. Like,
definitely. It's very well written television, and it's nice to see people in politics being portrayed as both capable and idealistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of the like House of Cards, setting aside Kevin Spacey and whatever, but like it was almost the anti that.
It was a very good show, and it was the opposite of the West Wing. Absolutely.
Right. Because I think it felt like very regal and whatever, but it was also very much like, let's lean into all the awful things that could happen with corruption and vile people in charge.
Acquiring power for power's sake, as opposed to acquiring power to try and do good.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like 7 episodes of 20 some episodes per season. I'm just not cut out for that kind of endurance anymore with our 10 episode season, like Severance or Silo or whatever. And yeah, that's a commitment, but I don't know, one of these days.
But it was also a different time of television where it was mostly episodic. Do you know what I mean? There wasn't a long, there were kind of currents of storylines throughout that would poke up every once in a while in the season. And it wasn't until you got to the end of the season where a storyline would take up 2 or 3 episodes.
Right.
But this was like pre-Lost, where narrative seasons of television were rare.
Yeah. That's a funny thing we've explained to our kids too, like, which they're just like, whatever, old man. But like the idea that a storyline would carry from one episode to the next was like groundbreaking.
Right. It wasn't a thing. Yeah. TV executives didn't think we had the patience for it.
Yeah. And even like comedies for sure did not do that. Like, definitely there was dramas where characters could have a bit of an arc, but yeah. Anyways, it's a funny place to be. 150. What did I just did the math there. What is 154? Is that right? 7 times 22. 7 times 22. 154 episodes, so roughly 150 hours, something like that.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll set aside a Christmas.
Yeah. The first. Yeah. And the first, I can't remember if Sorkin wrote the first 3 seasons or the first 4 seasons. But anybody who's a West Wing and Sorkin fan will be glad to explain to you that West Wing was written in a hotel while he was also writing The American President. And while he was trying to sell the West Wing, he accidentally sold Sports Night. And so for the second season of Sports Night, he was writing both the first season of the West Wing and the second season of Sports Night.
Nice. Sports Night is that the? Oh yes, I remember. didn't last long.
And the only reason Sports Night didn't continue is because he just couldn't do both.
You're too good. And
yeah, it was a moment in time where his writing was it was the right tone at the right moment, where TV was kind of getting stale, and this they talk like real people kind of thing was very welcome. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like in the 90s, TV, at least American television, was awash with sitcoms, which were entirely tropey and formulaic, and it's now a trope, but they talk like real people was a thing that wasn't on TV at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Explaining, we were watching Severance, and like my 12-year-old was like, oh, I like, she watched part of an episode with us, and I was like, we're going to watch another one. Are you wanting to keep watching? And she's like, yeah, I find it really interesting. Because I was like, really? It's like just people talking in very bland offices and then occasionally there's someone running. And like, but she's actually into it, which is, I think, a testament to the fact that the story or the writing,
the story and the tone of Severance are very good.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, it was one of those things where we sat down to watch, I think, the second episode. They've only released 2 episodes of the second season, but in our mind, they had more, and we had stopped halfway through the second episode for reasons. And so we came back and we're like settling in for the evening last night to like, we're going to watch and catch up with Severance. And it was like, we watched 10 minutes and then that was it.
Yeah.
Anyways, so she didn't miss much because she had to go to bed. Okay. Pulling back out again to podcasts, which is theoretically what this little thing is about. So since last we talked, let me just go back to the last stream notes that I had. This is my AI Descript version of what we talked about. Tim and Chris discussed creating Notion document, Riverside, Descript. Yeah. So I had recorded an episode, or I recorded a conversation with somebody last time, and when we talked, Crumb, and I had an attempted to add a couple of other conversations that, nothing against the people who I was talking with, weren't either ready for the actual quote unquote interview or otherwise. But I now have 2 other people scheduled for next week to have conversations with about why they followed me, and then whatever follows after that. And so I'm still, I think I'm waiting for either this is a stalling tactic to, instead of doing the work, which you can call me on, obviously, or whoever, someone in the chat could call me on, but I'm still sort of waiting for like what the show is about, to have enough conversations with people to figure out what the show is actually about before I start editing an episode too deeply, which sounds like I'm being all fancy or whatever with it. And normally with a show that I edit for clients, I don't spend that long debating the deeper life meanings of a conversation about CSS3 or whatever. But just for this, because I'm afforded the time, and because I'm lazy and want to avoid doing the actual grunt work, I can say I'm doing the deeper philosophical thing of waiting for what the show wants to tell me before I dive in too deeply. And because there's sort of 2 frames of thought that I have with it, where one is this sort of what most people will be familiar with, an interview-driven episode, where this episode features, in that case, Crumb or whatever was his show, and that episode would be just me talking to him, and the tangents all sort of like relate back to him as the focus, and indirectly me. Or I could do topic-driven episodes where maybe I have 3 to 5 conversations with people, and there's a through line on one interesting thing that I could pull from those conversations and edit them together into one episode and then go on, which is a lot more work, obviously, to do, but can create a more interesting podcast. And in podcasting generally, like kind of like what you were alluding to earlier with the various shows that you're like, when they're personality driven podcasts, that personality has to be interesting enough to follow, but then also you can get sort of dry or whatever, or bored of it, or not your thing. Whereas a sort of topical driven podcast, you might tune in for an episode that's interesting to you, but not tune in because the next one is all about trauma or whatever that doesn't fit your fancy or whatever. So does that sound interesting, or like, does that make sense, or is that me being fancy and lazy?
No, it totally makes sense.
Because Yeah. Now that I have, if nobody had actually queued up, because I sent out an email to the list. By the way, if you're, I should say this on here just because sometimes people don't ever look at anything beyond the video, I guess. The 20 or so people that ever watch them. But if you're wanting to, where's my thingy? If you're wanting to follow along, then buttondown.com/lemonpodcasting. And if you can remember, I'll put it in the description below, but if you throw that tag on, why did you follow me? I have a larger list. The tag isn't for any sort of real tracking thing. It's just to not annoy the other people who signed up for my mailing list a while ago. And because I don't want to bother them with this if they're not interested in it. So if you throw that tag on with the capital letters, as we've discussed, but the link will be in the description below. That's how you can be notified about new stuff as it's happening with the podcast about why'd you follow me. And then if you'd like to be within each issue of that newsletter, I'll throw the link, which I should probably find a nice, fancy, short link version of this. But you can sign up at this link, which again will be in the description, to just be notified.
Should I do that thing?
Yeah. We need to stop for the thumbnail, like, what? Kind of moment. But anyways, it started off, I haven't yet officially said other social networks, but it's just because it started off as an idea on Blue Sky, but I'll change this to just like your social network username or whatever, just so I know where to find you. And then you can choose whether you want to be a guest or just like you just want to stay in the loop on finding out about the show more. You're not required to tune into the live streams if you want to be a guest on the show. You're not obligated to be on the mailing list if you want to be a guest. You can just fill this form out. I'll send you a calendar invite, and you pick the dates that work for you, and we'll figure out when that might be, and then you can be on the show as well. I guess, and technically, the only rule is you do have to follow me, because it would be kind of silly if you just... So at least subscribe to the YouTube channel.
Why don't you follow me is a different podcast.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it'd be fun. It would be fun and maybe humbling or whatever to do with a "Why Did You Unfollow Me" podcast, an exit interview with people who used to follow.
Nobody needs to explain.
Yeah,
unfollowing anybody.
I love the response when people are like, "You can just go away. You don't have to tell me. It's fine. I don't need to be everything to everybody." So yeah, I think what I will end up doing today, I don't know if there's anybody actually watching or not. I don't have the stats in front of me. I'm probably going to need to just edit a podcast, like for work. And where's my stream manager? Show me the stats. 2 viewers maybe on Twitch, 1 on YouTube, it says. I might just edit a podcast here. And, oh, by the way, Eggwitch, thanks for following. I got the little notification halfway through, but I wasn't actually on.
That's me.
Oh, that's exactly that's the...
You're welcome. You're welcome, by the way.
So, Tim, why did you follow?
I thought it would be rude.
There, I just used the Twitch clip that moment thing for the first time. Oh, that's awesome. That's the beauty of the internet, of how quickly it humbles you. You're like, oh, 2 viewers. One is actually Tim, your co-host, and the other one is probably the dashboard that's telling me it's viewers. Myself. I assume Twitch has that figured out, but you never know.
Yeah.
So, at any rate.
Yeah. So if you are the dashboard, put an F in the chat. Just let us know.
Is it an AI? Yeah, an AI dashboard. Please identify yourself somehow with a bot emoji at least. Oh dear. So much for my fans. Anyways, I'm going to edit a podcast. Tomorrow.fm is the podcast, and I think I'll do it on stream. It's always awkward because they've cleared me to like go ahead and just edit live. That's not a big deal. They actually record it live often on their own Twitch channels sometimes. And usually they tell me if they have something that's sensitive they need to cut out or whatever. And so then I wouldn't obviously stream those ones. But I think maybe it's probably not super interesting for you to follow along or remain on because
sure.
I'm not trying to get rid of you now that I know.
There's a lot of fiddly work.
Simply following me.
I guess 2 things collide.
You can hear that, right? First of all.
Yes.
Just making
yes.
sure. Is it louder than it was before, or is it the same?
It is
Collided
on.
in the air. In the air. I always worry about that. You always think like, I don't know, could something just run into the side of us because they didn't know we were here?
Sounds like it'll be a depressing talk. I think they're talking about the airline
Just
crash.
give me a quick overview before you get into it. Like, you get 2 audio tracks. Is that how it works?
Yeah. So this, first of all, I guess stepping way back,
Ideally.
this is Logic Pro. They record here. I'm just going to switch back to this view for a moment, just while I open a browser window to make sure it actually is not safe for work, but safe for public consumption. Pretty sure it would be. I don't know why it wouldn't be. And then back to us. There we go. Okay, so they use Riverside, like we talked about previously, to record episodes. So nice thing actually is, I mean, obviously while you're paying for it, so it's nice they do this, I guess, but it's a built-in archive backup of every episode they recorded. So for whatever reason, you're like, oh, we talked about that thing on that, whatever. You could theoretically, and now thanks to AI and transcripts, you could search for stuff in here. So this is the recording they did 5 hours ago. And what I do is I grab the raw audio from each track. Hey, Riverside, if you're listening, someday please just give me 1 click instead of having to go through every track. Obviously with 2 tracks, it's not a big deal, but I assume that somehow a web page could do that since we can edit video,
Probably.
4K video. I've been asking for it since day one. It's still, I can't, they've gifted me an account, so I can't complain too much. But anyway, so I download the 2 audio tracks. From there, I actually, iZotope, I have a subscription for this app, which is basically like a cleanup denoiser. It's what some of the apps like Adobe and other apps that you have will proclaim to do for you with AI and stuff like this. This is a bit more manual and fiddly, but it's what I've been using for years and it works. And so I can just basically spit it through that and clean up and level and sort of a basic, like not a aggressive, but does a lot of the heavy lifting for me before I then import those files, audio files. So this is the post iZotope files into what I use for, if it's strictly an audio podcast, I use Logic Pro, like we talked about last time. If it's video at all, then I would use Descript or Final Cut Pro. So I have a template. In their case, it's pretty easy. Music at the beginning, music at the end, and then the 2 tracks get dropped in. And I've gone through the remarkable effort of customizing enough to add the host's images to the tracks, just for, sometimes helps to humanize or whatever for me when I'm working, rather than just a waveform all over the place. And from there, it's just a matter of basically, I can't edit it and talk at the same time because it's really loud in my ears.
I was just on the news. I just read about a plane crash,
And so I'll just ignore the content for the sake of obviously being what it is. But chop off the beginning. I'm not trying to downplay what I do, but some of it is fairly simple. And this is after years of using Logic Pro. Other people like to use other apps, obviously, for a variety of reasons, but Logic Pro is the one. Because of the templating, like it's really geared for, obviously, music production, but because each show I can have a template for it, I'm not starting from scratch. The intros, the outros, any sponsor music,
Sure.
tracks.
Right. Every show's got its own intro and cadence.
And even down to like, an EQ for each person or whatever, if they use different mics, etc. All of that's kind of set up.
Oh, okay. So got it. So kind of, is there an ideal sound that every EQ for each podcast is going for, or does each podcast have its own ideal sound?
I mean, probably if someone was doing like a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like archaeological dig into the history of podcast editing and somehow stumbled into the vein of, Chris Lemon Productions podcasts or whatever, there would be like a bit of a signature sound to that, probably over what Studio B or, whatever other editors use. In general, though, like the goal is to sound like a professional podcast. And so the only thing
the goal is to sound like these 2 people are sitting in the same studio as every other podcasters, all the other podcasters in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and as the world has kind of synthesized down to the Shure SM7B microphone that everyone from whatever Joe Rogan down to your favorite tech podcaster is using. And there's 100 other mics, obviously, that people are actually using, but that's the one you see. It kind of, I think it actually does a pretty good job of like, obviously everybody's voice is different, and that's the most important part. You don't want to like make them sound different just for the sake of different. And so it does a great job of being a fairly neutral agent in the whole podcasting mix so that everybody's actual voice comes through really well. And so that's where with the EQ too, I try not to do much fiddling. And that being said, I've never met Adam or Dax, in this case, the host of this show, in real life. So I don't know. Maybe I am, maybe their wife or their partner or whatever would listen to it and be like, that is nothing
that's not
like
what
what you
they sound
sound.
like.
Yeah.
Right.
But I haven't got that feedback yet anyway. So yeah, try to aim for neutral-ish, but just cutting out any highs or lows mainly. So
Makes sense.
and it is a bit of an alchemy, I think, too, where I haven't gone to school for like EQing or audio engineering even or anything to that degree. And so more of like stumbling into this backwards. But so it is a bit of like subjectiveness too. And so I've had clients where I can't really get their EQ right for them, or prospective clients, I guess, in that case, like something was off and they just didn't jive with what I was doing or whatever. And that might be part
They
of it.
didn't
I
like the
guess.
flavor of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is fair. But so yeah, that's the benefit of picking these two guys is they're technology guys who also have developers who have a fair amount of disposable cash, let's just say, in terms of like giving money to a hobby where they do have really expensive setups. And they have like good listenership and stuff. It's not just like two people listening and one of them is the co-host.
Right.
So I actually want to do an episode of, at some point here, a conversation with them, whether it's on here or just my blog or whatever, but just like their workflow. Because remarkably, just even, what was I going to say? To show like, I think I still have their stuff downloaded. Yeah, so like tomorrow is this show. And it's just an example. Basically, like there's very little noise when he's not talking. Versus even something, not to pick on Chris Coyer, but just, am I back? No. Oh, there we go. Something happened to my audio.
Yep.
Oh no, it wasn't him, but I think it's Dave. That's weird. I don't know why I keep there.
Is your internet
back
flaking out, or
No, I think it's because it's changing from 48K to 44K, like the kilohertz. What's the word I'm looking for?
so your processor is like,
Yeah, because I'm plugged in externally, and oh, these are I already cleaned these up. That's why I was like, why are they so clean? I swear I looked at these and they weren't.
Okay.
So I've deleted stuff here, but basically all I was trying to show is just that. Okay, for future reference, I guess I won't be doing this kind of thing live on a stream because it's a little disheartening to have it all of a sudden disappear because of the amount of gear. And Chris and Dave have a decent amount of gear as well, but I think they have like the Tomorrow FM guys also have. Okay, I'll stop doing that.
cut it out.
Literally, they have even more expensive gear.
Different
anyways.
people have different setups, which
Exactly.
provides you with varying qualities of recordings.
And the trouble is obviously trying to like navigate how much are they willing to put into it? How much are they willing to just deal with it? And how much they want to pay me to fix it instead of them buying more gear? And
Sure.
What are they willing to do to keep listeners engaged? Because obviously, I think like we talked about last time, crappy audio will kill anybody's interest in something very quickly, over much more so than video.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
if you're not willing to buy the $400 microphone, are you willing to buy the $150 one or whatever, just to keep people watching or listening? But from there, it's basically like, as far as editing goes, I would be editing for content, editing out, crosstalk. There's a bit of like,
So really bad timing.
Man. Yeah. It's like, I guess two things collide.
like, just for example, I won't go too long on this, but like where it's obviously just them carrying on a conversation, but it's not important to the tone of the conversation or to reference it in any meaningful way. Cut stuff out, cut out noises that happen. I can kind of just see that that's probably just a little blip on
Yeah.
his side of the call. This is maybe him laughing or something.
Good. But I'm
Sort of become a bit of an audio waveform whisperer after a while, and even shows like our guest or host specific too, where you can recognize almost. Like the I see dead people in my sleep or whatever kind of meme of like I just see waveforms of people saying and that's my trigger. But so I'm kind of.
And do you have a procedure with all your clients about how to recognize moments where they moments they don't want included? Do you know what I mean? Like, is there a moment? Is there something that identifies Chris? Don't include this. Yeah.
Well, usually they will. It's actually funny. I picked this show because, like, for these guys, they're very much fine with. I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but like they're fine with putting stuff out there if it's at the risk of them not like being canceled or something like that, but they're not like that edgy in terms of whatever saying really offensive things, but they're okay with exploring conversations at least around controversial things and knowing that they might misspeak and need correction, but not in the form of me just hiding it from their listeners, I guess. And their Twitter accounts would be the same way. Like, so for better or worse, whatever that may be. So there'd be times where I'm like, with this show in particular, where I'm like, ooh, I wouldn't say that, but I've learned that they don't care, which makes them sound like, in this climate, it's hard to like, I don't think they're like, they're definitely not in the like Nazi sympathizer extreme. That.
And I didn't even mean it like that. I just mean it like a lot of times, like you say something and like, I could have said that better. Do you know what I mean? Like, let me say that more clearly.
Yeah. So other shows, so these guys would be straight to tape, more or less, like edit out flubs, or something, or coughs, or clean up the audio, but more or less straight to tape, and like that's what we want out there. Whereas other shows I have would be more of like they'll like especially a couple of the fitness people that I edit, where they have it's a solo show and they're just like talking about how your glutes can be whatever, and then she'll just say like, oh, actually, Chris, let me just restart back at blah and redo that. I think I could.
So that's something you have to listen for.
Yeah. It's definitely not a set it and forget it or whatever. And that's where I'm sure there's ways for AI to replace that eventually. Like obviously every time we say like, oh, I can't believe, or I can't imagine AI doing that or whatever, then somehow it's like doing something similar to that, just at the cost of obviously like a massive energy suck or whatever. But
right.
So like in theory someday that could happen as well, obviously. But there is like there's still so much human interface, human interaction with it that feels like it results in a better product because they can reliably do that. And that's what I think when you can afford to, especially if you're not doing like a live stream or any sort of public performance of the recording, it's super handy. And that's like one of the things on my website that honestly has been like by far, aside from word of mouth, which is the most common way I get clients, but this like why hire a podcast editor thing. And it's just...
All right, Chris, how are you, sir? Notice that there's sound effect to start and a sound bite from my guest. So we'll pause for that. 3, 2, 1.
This is going to be a tough one for you, Chris, and sorry about that. Do what you can.
Okay, I'm going to dive into web components. I just think that's a good sign. We'll let that pass and we'll edit this out. Oh, that's my dog. I apologize. We'll fix that in post.
It's just the way it is, but you sound good, Dave. I wouldn't worry about it too much. Plus, we have the masterful Chris Enns on audio engineering.
I flew him down from Canada to sit by me on a mixer. He's
just so good at editing, and it just doesn't make sense for me to do it. Yeah, we'll just send it to him.
Nope, that's not the way it worked. Chris, will you go back and edit that part out? I'm going to start over.
Yeah. Am I pink or
you?
You're pink.
I totally that all up, didn't I?
Doesn't matter. That's why we have Chris.
My bad, Chris. Sorry about that.
Yep.
Sorry. You'll have to cut this out, Chris. Delete everything we just said, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. You're cool. Bye.
But that's why we have an editor. Go, Chris, cut that out. Cut that out. Lemon, you're saving us.
I like the way you're phrasing this. But let's take a quick break from a word from our sponsors. Thought you wanted a little music there, Chris.
Anyway, so yes, in answer to your question, people, and that's what I try to encourage folks, because often they'll be they're like, I feel like I'm repeating myself already in our conversations, but like they'll be stuck on this idea that they're recording it and they can't start over unless they hit stop and record again and start a new file. And like, it takes frustratingly long for some people to like unlock that from their brain of like, no, I can just like keep recording. Just one file is great, but just say like, okay, actually I'm going to start that paragraph again.
Yeah. I understand that feeling though. It's like you're making a thing and you want it to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And so it can be frustrating to let it not be perfect, knowing that there's another step.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little, I don't know if this is a good analogy or a bad analogy, but like my mom has a cleaner that comes, but she cleans her house before the cleaner comes so that it's not you're like, why are you paying?
You don't want it dirty for the cleaner.
Yeah. And so it's kind of, there's a bit of that too, because it is still a performance that you're sending to somebody. Like I get to hear it, you know, even though you know that I'm going to be fixing it in theory. And that's why you're paying me to do it. But yeah. So that, I think once people unlock that, honestly, that's like one of the biggest. You're just, you look like you were frozen, but you're actually just like locked in on something. But yeah, like once people unlock that idea of I can just do the thing, relax, know that it's going to get edited, like the people who I included in those clips, obviously. Then I feel like the show, if you call it a performance, which some people are reluctant to do with a podcast because we're just having a casual conversation. It's not a performance, but like it still is if you're hoping to have listeners and subscribers, and you know, it is a performance of some sort. But if you want to have a good performance, then yeah, getting to start over and restating something, or even like with a guest, like if I was interviewing you, I think I did this with Karam even, where I asked a question, he sort of fumbled an answer, like he came to the right, or not the right answer, but like he came to the answer I could tell he wanted to say, but it took him a while to get there. And so I just said, why don't you just restate that again? Because I feel like you landed on it better than you started or whatever.
Sure.
So then even in that case, like it's ostensibly my show, but I want the guest to sound good and smart and interesting. And I know they are because I can hear them say the thing, but they just kind of needed a take too.
In that moment. Yeah. Their brain was ahead of their mouths or vice versa.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyways, all that to say, like the power of editing, which if you're doing your own stuff, obviously I like, even with my own show or with this thing or whatever we're calling this that you and I are doing right now, like I do not go back and really edit much unless there's a really obvious, like, yeah. Right. I'm just stuck on Nazi salutes because of the whole Elon this week. Tim accidentally slips up a Nazi salute or something, and we're like, oh, that should be.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna. Yeah. No joking around with the Nazi salutes.
Yeah. It's yeah. Anyways, so the power of editing is a nice thing to have if you can either afford it or do it yourself for your own shows, obviously. So yeah. Any other? You see this massive. I'm kind of getting intimidated now at how long. An hour and 12 they recorded.
Do you listen to the whole thing before you start editing?
No, not with, especially with these kinds of shows where it's again,
very extemporaneous and you're very familiar with them. You don't need to listen to them.
Exactly. There's
another
show.
I've always wondered about so there's lots of streamers who, you know, spend hours playing a video game and then put out like a 10-minute video on YouTube. And it's like, how does the editor approach that? Do they actually watch the whole stream to kind of get a theme to edit around, or do they just start cutting right away?
Yeah. I think this is terrible. Whose website is this? The hover. Somehow I've turned the hover into white or slightly off white. It's almost there. Ugh. I keep threatening myself to get off of WordPress for reasons, and then whenever I go to do that and have my portfolio that I'm like, yeah. Anyways,
yeah.
The question you actually asked though was about. Oh, now I'm brain farting.
Do you listen to the whole thing?
Oh yes, that's why I went to my website. Thank you. So a show like Podcast Awesome, which is from the folks behind Font Awesome. If you're a web nerd, you might be familiar with them. It's a little bit more of a conversation. Sometimes he has 3 or 4 people on their team that he talks to through a topic and then chops them up a bit. But he does a lot of the editing sort of initial first pass. So it's sort of more or less in the format that they want it in. And then I'm just doing sort of cleaning up, sanding off the edges, you know, adding, EQing a bit, music and stuff. But that would be a kind of show where I'm not the one doing it, but Matt there at Font Awesome is doing a lot of the gathering of stuff, and sort of then he would be listening back to a conversation he's had with people. He might have 3 or 4 interviews with people that each go for 45 minutes, but then coalescing them all into one show on a topic. And I think he would, these days he's using Descript as well for that, like we talked about last time, because it's so easy to just find stuff based on what people actually say, rather than like, you can imagine looking at this and being like, where did Adam talk about whatever Font Awesome in this episode? And then you would actually have to listen to it. But that is the advantage now with text-based editors like Descript, where you can just find the thing, or quickly scan it.
You can do a text search instead of listening through. Yeah. Okay. So cool.
So that's actually just in technology-wise, it'll be interesting to see if Apple's updated Final Cut Pro, their video editing suite, to add transcription service built in, so you can edit with text on the screen or whatever without having to send it elsewhere and then come back. But we'll see if they do that with audio, because Logic Pro is more of like actually it's for like doing music production, which obviously does not need transcription services so much. But there is a lot of people who use it, some people anyways, who use it for podcast or audio production like this, interviews and things. So we'll see if they update it with that, or they're just going to let the third parties do that. So yeah.
Cool.
Any other things? Questions?
No, that's about it.
I mean,
those are actually legitimately like 2 high-level questions I've had. It's like, how do you approach the job?
Yeah. And it's like, I get it for most folks, like, especially it's a Font Awesome episode that's daunting in front of me right now, which is why, because it's like a video and audio, and it's kind of like, how am I going to do this properly? And I remember like sweating, not literally, because it's just sliding my finger on the trackpad, but like, if I delete this thing, what do I do? Like, if I put that cut in, how do I, even just the technical aspects of knowing to select all to the right and move it left, and is that going to keep everything in line? And because I have obviously years now of experience with Logic Pro and trusting it for the most part, I know what's going to happen if I do things. Whereas definitely when I started out, it was just like, these kinds of things would have taken me twice as long, because I tend to overthink things, first of all, from a workflow perspective, and then also make mistakes in overthinking. And took me forever. And so just that stress of like, if you're doing it for yourself, whatever, it takes hours and hours, that's fine. But when you're like, I'm charging this much, and every time I make a mistake and it takes longer, I'm actually making less per hour, or per whatever metric you use for yourself. Those kind of stress things I overthink.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hey, we've got, where's my, I was going to say I can turn on, oops, wrong way. Dog chose to do the most, he was like spread eagle on the floor a few seconds ago. I should put that in the center of the, oops. So he didn't want to make an appearance at the beginning, but got him in there at the end. Dog, where's the center line? Sorry, this looks really dumb, but I've got the align grids there. There we go. There's Neville. Finally sleep. He usually sleeps with his head under the chair. I think it's for like self-preservation or something. But anyways, now that it's actually been an hour that we've talked, I think I will not do live editing, because I actually need to just edit, and it takes me twice as long to edit. Speaking of cost per hour.
Okay.
So we actually managed to find our way to a full episode, or whatever we're going to call this thing.
Well, next time I'll have fewer questions probably. So we might get some work done.
That's okay. This is my hope, is to talk through this stuff. So if you're out there in TV land, wherever you're up to be, Twitch, YouTube, feel free to subscribe. Obviously, you know how to do that better than I do, probably. And then, like I said, in the description below on YouTube, where this will live on, because for reasons unknown to me, Amazon and Twitch don't save video, even though they own the S3 servers that YouTube probably saves the video in the end or something. I don't know. Anyways, the YouTube video will be where the permanent archive is of this video, and description will have links to how you can be notified of new episodes, or eventually when there are episodes of the show, if you want to be a guest on the show potentially, and also just follow along with the development of the show. So thanks, Tim. Anything to promote, pitch, point people to in your world?
Not at the moment.
All right.
It's still in the middle of a move. Signing lease tomorrow, hopefully, and next week we'll be maybe in a new spot. Hopefully.
Maybe we can, we can flip the tables, do a live stream of you unpacking an apartment in New York, and I can ask you the questions.
Really exciting.
I'm sure people will be fascinated. Okay. Until next time. Thanks, Tim. See you, folks. Wherever
See you later.
Be. Bye.